Hello, everyone. You are tuned in to Hawthorn University's Holistic Health and Nutrition webinar series, and I sure want to thank you for joining us as we welcome back the wonderful Rosalee de la Forêt for her presentation, 5 Powerful Weeds for Clinical Practice, where she reveals how the best medicine for our clients often lies within their own backyards. Let me share a little bit about Rosalee. She's a registered herbalist and is quite passionate about inspiring you to enjoy plants every single day, whether it's marveling their beauty or using their gifts as food and medicine. She's the best-selling author of the book Alchemy of Herbs and the soon-to-be-released book Wild Remedies, How to Forage Healing Food and Craft Your Own Herbal Medicine. She is the education director for LearningHerbs and a registered herbalist with the American Herbalist Guild. In addition to writing books, Rosalee teaches online courses about herbs, including Taste of Herbs, Herbal Cold Care, and Apothecary. Rosalee lives in a log cabin in the northeastern cascades of Washington State with her husband. She's an avid gardener and excels at cuddling up with her cat and a good book. Gotta love that. You can see more of Rosalee's articles and recipes on her website at herbswithrosalee.com. And in her presentation today, Rosalee is going to reveal for us the practical and effective ways to use abundant weeds for transformative health and well-being. We'll see how a wild fruit can be used to address systemic inflammation, how feral roots can be used to heal digestion, and how delicate spring flowers can relieve chronic upper respiratory challenges. And through this webinar, you'll be getting everything you need to know to start using these plants right away, from the dosage information to the practical clinical preparations. And there's going to be plenty of information here, so we don't want you to miss a thing. So we're recording this presentation, and it'll be available for replay on our website in a few days. Both the recording and the slides will be there. And we'll likely go 75 minutes for this presentation. We'll have time for questions and answers. So I encourage you to write your questions or your comments in the webinar question panel at any time so that you're in queue when we start the Q&A session. I'm your host, Paula Bartholomew, and now with all that said, it's time for me to welcome you, Rosalee. I'm so grateful you're with us and presenting again today.
Thanks, Paula. It's a pleasure to be here again.
It's really a pleasure to have you back, always. So if you're ready, we can go ahead and have you start, Rosalee.
All right, sounds great. Well, as Paula said, 5 powerful weeds for clinical practice, and I thought we should start at the beginning, which is why weeds. Weeds are often disdained, they're ridiculed. We know many gardeners hate them as they toil on their knees attempting to rid their gardens of them. And people in search of the so-called perfect lawn collectively spend billions of dollars buying poisons to eradicate weeds every year. And there are countless quotes and sayings regarding weeds, equating them to everything undesirable. And although many herbalists love weeds, not all of them do. Many years ago, I was in a clinical course and we had a guest teacher giving a lecture on herbs for the liver. And we discussed a lot of herbs that day, but as we finished the class, I was really confused why he hadn't mentioned one of the best herbs for the liver. So I raised my hand and I asked, "Why did you leave out dandelion root?" The teacher responded that it was too common, that he preferred exotic herbs from the traditions of Ayurveda or Chinese medicine because those herbs impressed his clients. And if he gave them dandelion root, they would just dismiss it as a common weed. And that response just blew my mind, and not really in a good way. So tonight, I'm going to be making the opposite case, and instead of parading out exotic herbs, I'm going to share about weeds and why these common, often locally abundant plants are the best medicine. And I believe this so strongly that I wrote an entire book about it, even after swearing that I would never write a second book. So yes, that's an image of Tori Amos, and I'm definitely going to make this relevant to herbs. I'll circle around. For those of you who don't know of her, Tori is a musician, she's a composer, and her fans tend to be fairly obsessive. And fair warning, I'm one of those obsessive fans. In 2017, I published my first book, Alchemy of Herbs, and then I had the opportunity to go to Ireland and give her a copy of the book. And so, like any obsessed fan, this seemed like an entirely sane thing for me to do. So I did. And Tori has been the soundtrack to my life, and I'd actually acknowledged her in my book, again, obsessive fan, and I was excited to give her a copy. And Tori, when I met with her, she was just incredibly present. She was very kind. And during our short time together, she asked me a question, which kind of took me off guard. But she asked me, what is the best way to take herbal medicine? So I know that, what she was asking was really like, is it better to take it as a capsule or a tincture or a tea or what have you? I've taught many hours on that exact topic, but in that moment, I went with a different answer and said something which, I hope was coherent. And I talked about incorporating plants into your life, whether it's food as medicine or spending time in nature. And then for days after that experience, I just, rewound that conversation over and over again. Because as I've mentioned, I've already admitted being pretty obsessive. And while I was doing that, suddenly and very clearly an idea landed in my head. I would write a book to answer Tori's question. And that book would be about weeds, wildcrafting, nature connection, and getting to intimately know the area where you live. And then moments after that, another idea landed. I only wanted to write that book with my friend and colleague, Emily Hahn. And that's Emily and I in my garden, geeking out on the weeds there. So that was 2.5 years ago, and our book, Wild Remedies, How to Forage Healing Foods and Craft Your Own Herbal Medicine, is being published next month, April 7th, 2020. So it's a really exciting time to see it all come to fruition. And a lot of the information that I'm sharing about wonderful weeds in this presentation is taken directly from the book. And before we get to those weeds, I just want to share one more story that was also inspired by my time in Ireland. This is a story about a young woman named Ellen. What Ellen loved most was feeling the ocean spray on her cheeks as she walked along the bay, or the wind in her hair as she crested a peak to search for her favorite plants. But it wasn't always that way. As a child, Ellen was very sick. She was the youngest of 6, raised by her mother after her father died when she was just 2 years old. By the time she was a teenager, her appetite was waning and her health quickly deteriorating. Finally, a family friend and doctor took Ellen under his wing, and he prescribed something that would dramatically change her life. His prescription was not a fancy new drug. It wasn't even an herb. No, what he prescribed was far more radical: botany. Ellen's doctor felt botanical studies would encourage her to spend time outdoors as she looked for plants, while also stimulating her mind indoors as she cataloged and drew the plants she found. Luckily, this was the perfect prescription. As Ellen delved into the natural world around her, her appetite returned and her strength grew. Her newfound love of plants became her passion. Ellen realized she had a gift for finding plants in the wild and for growing her own garden. Her enthusiasm and joy for life were ignited as her relationship with nature grew. And if you think prescribing botany sounds a bit unconventional for a doctor, you're probably right. Ellen Hutchins was born in Ballylickey, Ireland in 1785. She's credited with being the first Irish female botanist. Ellen produced a body of work identifying and cataloging seaweeds and lichens that remains celebrated today. Museums around the world regularly display her beautiful plant pressings and watercolors, and many plants have been named after her. The recognition that our good health and even our joy are intertwined with our connection to nature is as important today as it was in 1785. We could even argue that living in concrete jungles and spending our days working inside walls have made connecting with nature all the more urgent. Author and journalist Richard Louv has written and lectured extensively on what he calls nature deficit disorder, a term that describes the psychological, physical, and cognitive costs of human alienation from nature. Louv is not alone in his theories. A growing body of research shows that a lack of nature connection may be causing many modern health problems, including anxiety, insomnia, and depression. In 2015, Stanford University researchers examined the brain activity of people who went on a local nature walk compared with those who walked on a high traffic street. They concluded that walking in nature could lead to a lower risk for depression and other mental illnesses. In another study of nearly 1,000 residents of Sweden, researchers concluded that the more often people visit urban green spaces, the less often they will report stress-related illnesses such as burnout syndrome, insomnia and fatigue, depression, and feelings of panic. So unlike that guest teacher that I had in my own clinical training, I know that weeds are powerful medicine, especially those really common weeds that grow around us. I've seen weeds work as safe and effective herbal medicine time and time again in my own life, through the lives of my clients, and with thousands of my students. But it's not just that we use weeds or even how we take those weeds in a particular way. Instead, it's the bigger picture that gives us truly holistic healing. Weeds give us the opportunity to spend time outside, to gain the confidence to make our own medicine, and to participate in the world around us. The result is a joyful and enriched life. So that's what we'll be exploring tonight as we look at plants in this presentation. And our first weed is plantain. Growing everywhere from sidewalk cracks to seaside rocks, the humble plantain has many virtues, its utility ranging from acute first aid situations to chronic conditions. Best of all, if you know how to spot it, you can most likely find this plant wherever you need it. Various species of plantain are native to Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas. And in North America, the most commonly found species came from Europe. Plantain loves disturbed soils and can even grow in hard-packed earth with lots of foot traffic. When European settlers brought the seeds to North America, they spread so readily via horses' hooves and wagon wheels headed west that plantain was commonly called white man's footprint. I took this photo on the streets of Edinburgh, Scotland, where they have cobblestone streets, and this was just plantain growing there in the middle of this cobblestone street. Well, you could spend a lot of time trying to memorize plantain's medicinal applications, but you'll have a deeper understanding of its abilities when you view it through the lens of its energetic properties. Plantain is energetically cooling and excels when you use to counteract hot conditions such as redness, sometimes yellowness, sharp pain, swelling, inflammation, or simply feeling overheated. Burns are an obvious example of a hot condition, as the burned area feels warm to the touch and it turns red. A red, hot, itchy rash is another example. A fresh plantain poultice can soothe burns and rashes by both pulling out the heat and healing the damaged tissue. Plantain may be most famous for its ability to soothe painful insect bites and stings. It's used to treat bee stings and even to counteract the venom from spider bites. I've seen this work again and again on many types of bites and stings. And so for best results, apply a plantain leaf poultice as quickly as possible after the sting, and then change the poultice every 20 minutes or when it feels warm to the touch. A plantain salve can also work well, especially on common itchy insect bites, like those from flies and mosquitoes. And when making a salve, I like to combine plantain with other lovely plants like self-heal and yarrow. Plantain also has many healing gifts for chronic conditions. One of my favorite ways to use it is to heal the mucous membranes of the digestive tract. A strong plantain leaf infusion or a tea can be one of the most dramatic healers for inflammatory digestive problems, including intestinal permeability or leaky gut, ulcers, and inflammatory bowel diseases. In this situation, plantain soothes the inflamed tissues. It helps to heal the tissues as a vulnerary. It can prevent bacterial overgrowth as an antimicrobial, and can seemingly knit those tissues back together as an astringent. It can also heal the upper digestive tract. For example, it can relieve the pain of canker sores and speed up the healing of the affected tissues. It's also a nice tea for people who have acid reflux, as it can soothe and heal the tissues of the esophagus. I like it as a tea combined with calendula flowers and rose petals. The seeds are mucilaginous and high in fiber, and seeds from Plantago ovatum, a type of plantain, and Plantago psyllium are sold as psyllium seed and husk, which are used to maintain bowel regularity. Psyllium is the basis for the Metamucil brand name. The seeds from Plantago major, Plantago rugelii, and Plantago lanceolata, all different kinds of plantains, can be used similarly, but the process of harvesting enough of those tiny seeds is really time consuming. So that's not necessarily something I do. I buy it already harvested and prepared. Plantain is also great for some types of coughs. You know that type of cough that's like the dry hacking cough that just can feel so endless and so painful. You typically get this kind of cough at the end of a cold or flu, or sometimes from inhaling small particles such as dust and smoke. Well, for that type of cough, plantain is amazing. It soothes those hot, dry, and spasmodic coughs. It moistens the lungs, it cools the heat, and thus relieving the irritation that's causing the cough. So I really love it as a tea specifically for soothing those types of dry and spasmodic coughs. So how to identify it? Well, plantain thrives in areas with human disturbance, from hiking trails to parking lots. There are many species of plantain that can be used similarly. Commonly used species include Plantago major, which has those egg-shaped leaves, and Plantago lanceolata with lance or arrow-shaped leaves. Generally speaking, plantain has basal leaves that are simple with conspicuous parallel veins. And if you tear a leaf, you'll see that those veins look like white strings. It's kind of similar to what happens if you break apart celery. And then arising from those, that leafy base are slender leafless stalks with a cylindrical spike of tiny flowers that can be white, green, or even yellow. Then those flowers mature into tiny egg-shaped capsules that contain the seeds. Here's some ways that plantain is part of the larger ecosystem. Insects that feed on the leaves, buds, and flowers include grasshoppers, flea beetles, and moth and butterfly caterpillars. Mammals such as squirrels, rabbits, groundhogs, and deer eat the flower spikes. The seeds are eaten by birds and small mammals like mice and squirrels. And animals, including people, help disperse the seeds, which can stick to feet and fur. Plantain also has a potential for phytoremediation. For example, researchers have studied the ability of Plantago major to accumulate lead, as well as pesticides in contaminated soil and water, with promising results. So it could be used to help clean up some of our soils. So how to harvest? Well, the leaves can be gathered at any time during the growing season. If you plan to eat them, they are most palatable when young. But if you're using them for medicine, they are likely to be more potent before the plant has flowered and gone to seed. Really, I use plantain whenever I need it. You can use your fingers to pluck the leaves at the base, although they do have those stringy veins, which can sometimes be hard to break, so scissors can be handy. You can harvest the seeds after they've turned brown or black. You can cut the stalk and then shake the seeds into a bag. For propagating it, plantain is pollinated by wind and generally doesn't need our help to thrive, but as long as you let plantain develop flowers and seeds, it should be produced pretty easily. So how to work with plantain? Well, young plantain leaves are nutrient dense and considered edible, but admittedly, they aren't always palatable. Depending on the plant, they can actually be quite bitter. What I've done is I've chopped them up really finely and added them to salads and stir fries. They can be pretty yummy like that. They can also be blanched first to remove some of the bitterness. Young leaves are definitely best for eating. As the leaves get older, the strings within them get tougher and more difficult to eat. My first mentor would say that eating older plantain leaves is like flossing while eating because those little strings get caught in your teeth. The seeds are also edible. They don't have a lot of flavor. They can be eaten raw or added to cooked foods, or whole plantain seed stalks can be steamed and eaten if you find it too tedious to collect the seeds. Fresh plantain is best for addressing wounds, burns, bites, and stings. And as mentioned, a poultice can be made by mashing the fresh leaves into a mortar and pestle, or simply chewing up a wad of the leaves to make a spit poultice. You can use plantain tincture in a variety of ways. I do prefer the fresh leaf tincture as opposed to the dried. And you can use that, you can take it internally for coughs. I've used it also for clients with seasonal allergies, as taking it before allergy season starts, as well as use it topically for bugs, bites, and stings. The tincture can also be used for those dry spasmodic coughs, as mentioned, but I actually do prefer the tea for those dry spasmodic coughs. I also prefer the tea for digestive healing, so I just think the water really helping to soothe and coat the entire digestive system. I use plantain tea a lot for sitz baths for hemorrhoids or postpartum. So lots of lovely ways to use tea, and these slides have the dosage on there too. Plantain tea being up to 30 grams daily, which is about an ounce, so you can use it in pretty large amounts. I do have a recipe for you. It's a digestive tea recipe, and rather than share it in the presentation, which can be kind of clunky because you'll need time to write it down, etc., what I've done is I've gathered together some recipes for you, and I'll give you a link for you to download those recipes at the end of the presentation. All right, our next lovely neat weed is nettle. So, many of our modern day fruits and vegetables are actually missing nutrients, and perhaps we bred those nutrients out while we were making the fruits sweeter and tastier. That happened with apples and tomatoes, for instance. Or maybe those nutrients were lost as an unintentional consequence of monoculture and nutrient depleted soils. But in any case, our foods don't contain the vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients that they once did. The good news is that eating nettle is a powerful way to replace those nutrients naturally. Native to Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America, nettle grows all over Northern Hemisphere, and wherever it stands, humans take notice. The plant is covered in tiny hairs that are like hollow needles, and casually brushing up against those leaves or stems releases a slew of irritating chemicals into the surface of your skin, which results in mild but an uncomfortable rash. So who knows how many tens of thousands of years ago our ancestors figured out how to cook or dry the leaves to avoid the sting, but at any rate, we've been enjoying the many gifts of nettles ever since. This plant embodies food as medicine. Nettle's many gifts are often attributed to its wide-ranging nutrients, and most people could benefit from all of those nutrients, but nettle isn't for everyone. Especially when you first start drinking it as a tea or eating it in meals, it can be a really strong diuretic. The diuretic effect can actually lessen over time, but especially initially, nettle is very drying, and those who tend to already be dry, they have dry hair, dry skin, can easily experience an unwelcome increase of dry symptoms when using nettle. Sometimes this comes out as a headache. Adding moistening herbs like mallow or violets to nettle formulations can help offset that, but sometimes it's just simply too drying. Nettle is also cooling in nature, so for people who tend to be warm and damp, nettle is a nourishing and building plant with countless benefits. Nettle leaves are high in nutrients, including calcium, fiber, protein, and so many more. And few plants boast the nutrient content of nettles, and few plants have benefits as dramatic when enjoyed frequently. Eating nettle or drinking its strong tea regularly often results in things like healthier bones, stronger teeth, and more vibrant hair. Nettle can also improve skin health and is frequently used to reduce eczema and acne. Time and again, I've heard from people who start drinking strong nettle teas daily, and they are amazed at how much better they feel overall. Their minds are sharper, their energy is higher, and that energy is sustained all day. So a good candidate for nettles is someone who wants to do more, but just doesn't have the energy to do much. Nettle can modulate inflammation, which can be beneficial in a variety of ways. Seasonal allergy sufferers can find relief from their symptoms by drinking a strong nettle tea, starting a couple of months before their allergy season starts. And then freeze-dried nettle can be taken for immediate relief of acute seasonal allergy symptoms. Several studies have shown that a fresh alcohol extract of nettle leaves can reduce inflammation and blood glucose levels in people with type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance. One recent study showed that nettle may decrease risk factors of cardiovascular incidents and other complications in patients with diabetes mellitus. Nettle can also reduce pain associated with inflammation. Some of its nutrients, like magnesium, can help relieve musculoskeletal pain. And researchers have shown that a combination of nettle, rosehip, and devil's claw was effective at addressing knee pain. Even that uncomfortable sting of brushing up against fresh nettle can be used to bring blood flow to an area and thus reduce pain. So if that last example sounds a bit strange, you don't have to take my word for it. Researchers actually studied this. They did 2 studies showing that fresh nettle brushed against the thumb and knees can reduce pain and inflammation. I just really think those must have been some interesting studies to sign up for. Like, come on in on this study and we're just gonna whip you with these fresh nettles and see how it goes. But turned out well. Herbalists often reach for nettle root to support prostate health and to alleviate symptoms of benign prostatic hyperplasia, non-cancerous enlargement of the prostate. It's often combined with saw palmetto. In one study using nettle root and saw palmetto, researchers concluded that the herbs were more effective and safer than the conventional drugs prescribed for BPH. How to identify? Well, nettle loves damp, nutrient-rich soils and can spread to form dense colonies. It has erect, occasionally branched stems that are covered with bristly hairs and somewhat square in the cross-section. The oppositely arranged leaves are ovate to lanceolate with a pointed tip and sharply serrated margins. The leaves might be smooth or hairy, and in most species, long clusters of spike-like flowers droop from the leaf axils and have small greenish-white or pinkish-white flowers. These mature into tiny, flattened, egg-shaped seeds. And you might want to consult a local field guide to distinguish among the different species and subspecies. For example, Urtica urens differs the most as it's an annual, and it grows more shorter and it has a sharper sting. Nettle is a host plant for many insect young, including butterfly and moth caterpillars, beetle larvae, and midge larvae. Two butterflies associated with nettle include the red admiral and the question mark butterfly. Tall and dense stands of nettle also provide shelter for insects, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and small mammals. How to harvest? The leaves can be harvested before the plant flowers and goes to seed. Using your gloved fingers or scissors, you pinch off a few inches from the top of the fresh growth. Picking the tops of established plants can encourage them to grow more leaves, and then you can continue to harvest from established plants one or more times during the season. However, take care not to harvest the tops too often so the plants in the stand can eventually flower and go to seed. You want to collect nettles carefully to avoid getting stung, and if I'm harvesting a lot of nettles, I'll often wear gloves and also long sleeves. And because nettles can concentrate heavy metals and inorganic nitrates, you want to pay extra special attention to your harvesting areas. There are some lookalike plants, including wood nettle, which is edible, false nettle, and clearweed. So always a good idea to know what else might be out there that looks similarly. How to work with nettle? Well, nettle leaves are nourishing greens and they can be consumed in larger quantities like spinach or kale. They must be cooked or dried prior to eating because that eliminates their stinging hairs. I like to blanch the young leaves quickly in boiling water before using them in stir fries or pestos and other dishes. I also really like to blanch them and freeze them, and then they make a really wonderful wintertime meal. Consider using nettles anywhere you might use spinach, soups, lasagna, spanakopita, saag paneer, etc. And then dried and powdered leaves can also be added to smoothies and other foods. When using nettle tincture, I strongly prefer the fresh tincture as opposed to the dried. As I mentioned before, the studies regarding modulating inflammation specifically used, and also those lowering blood glucose levels, specifically used the fresh herb extract. The one thing about nettle that I like to remind people about is that alcohol does not extract vitamins and minerals. So there are reasons to use a fresh nettle extract. As we see, it does modulate inflammation, can lower blood glucose. But if we're thinking we want to get a lot of nutrients from the nettle, then we want to use it as a tea or eat it, because that's how we're actually going to be getting a lot of those nutrients. Drinking a strong nettle tea daily is something I've long practiced and I've recommended to countless clients. And this brew is just incredibly nutritive, and many people report they have numerous health benefits from a long-term daily practice. You know, you always want to keep a person's constitution in mind. I think most people can handle nettles well, but I've definitely seen a tendency, as I mentioned, of people who are already cold and dry, especially excessively so. They might have some problems drinking this tea consistently for a long time. The dosage there, 28 grams or roughly an ounce, which is approximately 2 cups of finely crumbled leaves daily. And I have a recipe for this in your handout as well. I also have a recipe for nettle and asparagus soup, which is one of my favorite springtime treats. All right, our next weed is the sunny dandelion. Now, dandelions tell us that spring is here. They're often among the first flowers to emerge, especially in northern climates. Dandelions bring important early nectar to honeybees and lift the hearts of all who anticipate longer days and warmer temperatures. The golden orbs fill lawns and meadows and even appear between the cracks in concrete. Dandelion is both tenacious and generous and is one of our most needed plant medicines. Dandelion is an opportunistic plant that originated in Eurasia and then spread to all temperate climate zones of the world. Europeans have long loved the plant as both food and medicine, and most likely intentionally and unintentionally brought the seeds with them to North America. The desire for the perfect lawn has engendered this common disdain for this beautiful plant, and today consumers spend billions of dollars on ecologically harmful herbicides for their lawns, mostly to eradicate dandelions. The energetic qualities of dandelion leaves and flowers are like spring itself, fresh, moving, and stimulating. The leaves are drying due to their digestive and diuretic effects. Both the leaves and the flowers are cooling in nature. Consider dandelion leaves and flowers for any type of sluggishness, whether it's the winter blues or stagnant fluids in the body, such as edema and lymph. The leaves support digestion. When dandelion leaves are young and tender, they have this slightly bitter taste, which stimulates many digestive functions and secretions. For this reason, the leaves are considered a spring tonic, something that's taken to enliven digestion after a winter of heavy meat and stored vegetables. And although we don't typically go without fresh foods for all of winter, dandelion leaves are still relevant today. They are some of our most nutrient-dense greens and can be considered a daily spark to maintaining healthy digestion. Spend a sunny morning picking bright yellow dandelion flowers and you'll undoubtedly experience one of their side effects. They bring joy and laughter to those who spend time with them. This simple gift is perhaps the most profound that dandelion has to offer. What is more precious than joy? And if that's not enough, then wait a while and the yellow blooms turn to seed heads. Dandelions offer up another gift, free wishes. Dandelion flowers are both food and medicine. As a food, they have a sweet, bland taste and are high in nutrients like lutein and beta-carotene, both known for their ability to support eye health. In addition to vitamins and minerals, dandelion flowers are high in flavonoids. One study looked at dandelion leaf and flower extracts and determined that the flowers have especially high flavonoid content. The study concluded they may be beneficial for diseases associated with oxidative stress, things like cancer, type 2 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, and cardiovascular diseases. Many herbalists reach for dandelion root to address a wide range of liver complaints, especially liver stagnation. Symptoms of a stagnant liver might include poor digestion, especially poor fat digestion or absorption, sour belching, estrogen dominance, and excessive premenstrual syndrome symptoms, including bloating, clots, cramping, irregular bowel movements, and emotional dysregulation. Herbalists often consider eruptive skin conditions to have their roots in poor liver function. And dandelion root can be paired with other alternative herbs such as burdock root and red clover to address skin conditions like acne, boils, and rashes. I really think that dandelion root is an underrated detox herb. And so I often tell people that instead of buying these, expensive and harsh detox kits from the store, to really consider dandelion. They don't have fancy marketing, but dandelion roots can be a safer and more effective way to support systems of elimination. So how to identify? Well, the plant's so well known, it might seem unnecessary to provide a description. However, people often mistake other yellow flowered plants for dandelions because there are some lookalikes out there. So it's useful to go over the details. So dandelions have a dense basal rosette of lanceolate or oblong leaves that are 2 to 14 inches long and about 1/2 to 3 inches wide. Each leaf has deeply lobed, irregular teeth and is generally broader at the tip. When broken, the leaves and stems exude a milky sap. From the center of the rosette arises one or more flowering stalks. Each stalk is hollow and leafless and has a solitary yellow flower head. The composite flower head is 1 to 2 inches in diameter, cupped by pointy green bracts and composed of numerous yellow ray florets. It doesn't have any disc florets. The fruit is a dry brown or gray seed with a tuft of silvery white hairs, which gives the mature flower head its round, furry appearance and helps disperse the seeds in the wind. The ecological connections of dandelion. Well, many species of moth caterpillars eat the foliage of the dandelion, as do mammals, including rabbits, groundhogs, pocket gophers, deer, elk, and even bears. The flowers provide nectar and pollen to insects such as honeybees, native bees, bee flies, and hoverflies. Small birds, including goldfinches and English sparrows, eat the seeds. How to harvest. Well, the leaves and flowers can be gathered by hand or with scissors throughout the growing season. The leaves are best when young, and they become more bitter and tough as they age. There's no set rule as to when they are tasty and when they're not. You want to look for visibly young leaves, then nibble some and let your palate decide if you'd like to eat more of them. Flowers and buds can be used whenever they're available. The flowers will readily go to seed, so it's best to harvest them and then use them immediately. And then when harvesting the flowers, keep in mind that they do provide early spring food to bees and other insects. Dandelion roots can be harvested in autumn or early spring. Roots harvested in autumn will have a sweeter taste and might be more pleasant as food. Spring roots often have a stronger bitter flavor, and some herbalists prefer spring roots for supporting liver health specifically. The ease or difficulty of digging the roots can depend on the soil they grow in. A hoary, which you see in the photo there on the right, is particularly useful for digging dandelion roots. And when you're considering about future harvests, well, as you know, dandelions tend to grow without our help, but if you can keep a stand going, by leaving part of the taproot in the soil. Just an inch-long piece of root can regrow. So, and then of course, dandelions propagate easily by seed, and so go out there and make lots of wishes. As I mentioned, every year, billions of dollars are spent on herbicides attempting to eradicate the dandelion. And so you want to harvest dandelions in an area that hasn't been poisoned for at least 3 years and is free of heavy metals. Potential lookalikes for dandelion include cat's ear, hawkweed, sow thistle, chicory, and young wild lettuce. So as I've mentioned, dandelion leaves and flowers are a nutrient-dense and delicious food. The leaves can be added to salads, sautéed, or made into a pesto. Dandelion flowers can be eaten whole. They can be added to salads, prepared as a jam or even a wine, and added to baked goods. Dandelion roots are mildly bitter. They're full of nutrients, and they're a wonderful way to use food as your medicine. When eaten regularly, those nourishing roots can support digestion, liver health, and a diverse gut microbiome. And encouraging your interested clients to harvest and eat their own dandelions is a wonderful way to get them outside and participating in their health. So dosage. Well, dandelion root can be used as a fresh or dried tincture or as a decoction or powder. When making the tincture, you want to be sure not to strain out that cloudy mixture in the bottle. That's the inulin. And the photo that you see there is actually echinacea root tincture, but I chose to put it there because it shows you what inulin looks like in a tincture. So that cloudy, milky part at the bottom, that's the part you want to make sure you keep when making a dandelion root tincture. Dandelion leaf can be enjoyed fresh or dried. You can use it as a dried or fresh tincture. It works great as a diuretic as a tincture. Two of my favorite ways to enjoy dandelion is fresh dandelion leaf pesto and a roasted root sprue. And both of those are great ways to include nutrients and dandelion into your life. And I find that my clients often really find these yummy as well. I included recipes for both of those in your handout. All right, next, moving on to Yarrow Achillea millefolium. Commonly found all over the Northern Hemisphere, yarrow offers us a myriad of healing remedies for both acute and chronic conditions. This plant is especially worth knowing if you spend any time outdoors, as it can be used fresh in a variety of first aid situations, from stopping bleeding to preventing the infection of wounds. Yarrow isn't technically a weed, kind of pushing it a little bit there with that. It's native to many different continents. However, it does grow prolifically, and it's often abundant and is a powerful herb for clinical practice. As herbalist Guido Mazet has pointed out, yarrow has been helping us since long before we were even human. Archaeologists in Spain analyzed the dental tartar of a Neanderthal who had lived 50,000 years ago and found that that Neanderthal had eaten yarrow. And because of yarrow's bitter taste, it's unlikely it would have been eaten as food. Its presence is thought to have been an early sign of hominids using medicine. Yarrow is seen frequently throughout human history as both a spiritual and a medicinal herb. In the Western world, yarrow was revered as a battlefield herb and called many descriptive names such as staunchweed, woundwort, and herba militaris. Energetically, yarrow is a harmonizer that shows us how nuanced and complex herbal medicine can be, because it doesn't just simply do one thing or act in one way. So for example, it can promote flow, or it can bring fluids to a stop. Although it's mostly cooling, it can have some warming qualities in situations. And while it's drying through its diuretic and diaphoretic qualities, it can also be moistening. So when we think about medicinal properties and energetics, yarrow sidesteps any attempts to easily categorize its many gifts. Yarrow is perhaps most famous for its ability to stop external bleeding and heal wounds. In Greek mythology, the centaur Chiron is credited with the creation of botany and herbal medicine, and he taught Achilles to use yarrow on warriors' wounds. This is the origin of the plant's genus name, Achillea. Yarrow has many virtues that make it the perfect wound herb. Used as a poultice, you can use it fresh, you can use it dried. It promotes blood clotting and can stop bleeding. It's mildly astringent, which can help pull tissues back together. It's broadly antimicrobial, so helping either to keep wounds clear of infection or to address signs of infection such as redness, heat, and pus. Herbalist Sevensong has used yarrow extensively for first aid, including as a hot tea soak for wounds, as well as animal bites and scratches that are prone to infection. It's one of his favorite plants for cat scratches, for example. Recent studies have confirmed yarrow's gifts for healing wounds. One study showed that oil infused with yarrow was effective in reducing skin inflammation. Another demonstrated that yarrow in combination with St. John's wort increased the healing of episiotomy incisions. Yarrow is also used to heal wounds and infections in the mouth. In Medicinal Plants of the Mountain West, Michael Moore shares how he used yarrow root to relieve a toothache. A distillate of yarrow has been found to heal the symptoms of oral mucositis in chemotherapy patients faster than simply using the routine solution. And while yarrow is best known for stopping blood flow, herbalists also use it to move stagnant blood and promote blood flow. So it's commonly used on varicose veins and hemorrhoids, both signs of stagnant blood. Physician Aviva Ram recommends yarrow as a topical treatment for varicosities related to pregnancy. It's also used as a pelvic decongestion for uterine fibroids and delayed menses. One double-blind clinical trial found that yarrow was effective at relieving pain associated with menstrual cramps. Taken as a hot tea, yarrow can make you sweat. It promotes circulation to the periphery, dilating capillaries and letting heat escape through the skin. Used in this way, it can be a powerful treatment supporting the fever process when someone is feeling hot and restless but isn't sweating. This is similar to how elderflowers are used. Yarrow tea, yarrow throat spray, or yarrow-infused honey can soothe a sore throat, and the herb can also be used to dispel a cough. Taken as a cool or lukewarm tea, yarrow acts as a diuretic and promotes the flow of urine. It's also antimicrobial and is frequently used to address urinary tract infections, often in combination with other herbs for the best effects. I like to combine it with things like bearberry or Octostaphylos uva ursi and juniper, Juniperus conemus, as well as echinacea. Eclectic herbalists use yarrow for a variety of urinary complaints, including irritation of the kidneys and urethra, suppression of urine, and chronic diseases of the urinary apparatus. Yarrow is aromatic and it's bitter, making a wonderful ally to support digestion. It can be used in bitters blends or taken as a tea. Eclectic herbalists use yarrow for people with dysentery, and the spicy aromatics of yarrow can be employed to deter insects like mosquitoes. You can do this by making a spray using yarrow infused in something like a witch hazel distillate or alcohol. Or in a pinch, what I've done is I've simply taken the fresh yarrow leaves and flowers and just rubbed them against my skin and clothes. So how to identify this lovely plant? Yarrow can be found in various locations and elevations. You can find it in open fields and mountaintops. You can also find it on seashores. Spreading by rhizomes, which form clumps, it has this aromatic dark green or gray-green leaves. The leaves start from a basal rosette and grow alternately up an erect stem, becoming smaller towards the top. The lanceolate leaves are finely divided, giving them a feathery or fern-like appearance. The flat-topped inflorescence consists of many small flowers, each of which is actually a composite of a small disc florets and surrounded by petal-like ray florets. Although wild yarrow flowers are generally white, they can also be pink tinged. I'm often asked if yarrows of different colors can be used. Some of them may also offer some medicinal benefits. However, since the taste and scent vary widely, it's best to stick with the wild or white variety rather than the hybrids. Ecological connections of yarrow. Well, yarrow is a host plant for butterflies, including the painted lady. Its flowers provide nectar and pollen to moths, butterflies, skippers, bees, wasps, hoverflies, and beetles. In fact, when you find yarrow, it's often covered in plants, or often covered in insects. They can attract predatory wasps, ladybugs, and spiders. Sheep and deer have been known to graze on the flower heads, and the foliage is an important food source for sage grouse chicks. The plant's extensive rhizomes can stabilize soil and prevent erosion. It can draw up nutrients from the soil, including potassium, phosphorus, and copper, and some gardeners use yarrow as a nutrient-rich mulch. The leaves can be gathered throughout the growing season as you need them. You can harvest the flowers just after they bloom or just before they bloom, but really you want them to be aromatic. To gather the leaves, you can use your fingers to pluck just a few leaves from each plant. To harvest both the flowers and the leaves, you can use scissors or pruning shears to snip stalks near the base. You want to leave the roots and several leaves so the plants can regrow. Yarrow reproduces by rhizomes and seeds. You can encourage future generations by keeping the roots intact and leaving enough flowers so the plant can produce seeds, which are dispersed primarily by the wind. Yarrow is superficially similar to the Apiaceae family, which contains a lot of potentially poisonous plants. There's wild carrot, Docus carota, and the more troublesome poison hemlock, Conium maculatum. So you want to carefully examine the flowers and learn how to distinguish them. Unlike Apiaceae flowers, each small yarrow flower is composed of disc and ray florets. So how to work with yarrow? Well, yarrow can be made into herbal medicine in many ways. It's soluble in water, oil, alcohol, and even witch hazel distillate. It can simply be used as an external poultice for addressing injuries and wounds, or it can be made into a tea or infused into oil or alcohol to use on wounds. As mentioned, when you take it as a hot tea, it can promote sweating. And then as a cool tea, it promotes diuresis. You can also use it as an herbal steam, which can decrease congestion in the lungs and sinuses, as well as promote healthy skin. There's the recommended dosage there. It can, as mentioned, can be used as a tincture or tea and applied externally as well as taken internally. There's really so many ways to use yarrow. One thing to note, especially when recommending it to clients, that taken as a tea, it can be quite bitter, especially in higher dosages. So in some cases, the tincture works better for people. All right, mullein is next up. One of my favorites, although I have to admit all of the ones I chose tonight are my favorites. As a generous restorer of disturbed soils, mullein offers refuge, food, and medicine to many creatures. The thick, large leaves provide a cool, protected habitat for small beings like mice or voles. Ants and other insects commonly patrol the flowers. In the fall, woodpeckers are frequently spotted moving up and down the mullein stalks, foraging the many insects found there. In some ways, mullein becomes its own microcosm of a habitat. Originally native to Europe and Asia, mullein has spread across the globe and is frequently found in disturbed soils. It has been used as medicine for thousands of years. Greek physician Dioscorides was recommending it for coughs more than 2,000 years ago. I just love this photo. I took this photo early dawn one day in my garden. And this is another photo from my garden, actually later in the season, also a picture at dawn. So every part of mullein has medicinal virtues. The leaves and flowers are used to soften and soothe, while the roots have a more warming and drying energy. The word mullein is related to the French word molle, meaning soft. Gently touching those large fuzzy leaves, you can understand the inspiration. However, when you strongly rub those leaves, the soft hairs become an irritant or a rubefacient and can be used to bring circulation to an area. Mullein leaves are nourishing and nutritive. They can be taken as a tea to support long-term lung health or used in the short term for more acute situations. Mullein leaf acts as a mild relaxant as well as demulcent, making an excellent remedy for dry, irritated lungs accompanied by a cough. Herbalists use mullein leaves to support people with asthma or bronchitis, or for those inhaling irritants like pollution or wildfire smoke. I especially like it combined with other demulcent herbs such as mallow. Mullein's large hairy leaves can feel like dense, thick wool. The complex web of fibers covering the leaves protects the plant from the strong rays of the sun. These same fibers are a bit irritating to human skin, which can be annoying, can be beneficial, or sometimes both. The action of irritating the skin is called rubefacient. This irritation dilates the capillaries, increasing circulation to the area, and has a wide variety of therapeutic applications. You can use it as a poultice on the chest, and in that way, mullein can help move stagnancy in the lungs, and it can help increase a healthy thin mucus that can be readily expelled, so it can help relieve congestion. Scientists may be finding new ways that mullein can support the lungs. A preliminary study isolated a constituent of mullein and was shown to be effective against a type of lung cancer. That's all preliminary, so looking forward to future studies and seeing how that evolves. Mullein root can strengthen the bladder and is used for incontinence caused by stress, pregnancy, or menopause, as well as childhood incontinence. Herbalist Krista Sinadinos also recommends mullein root for those with interstitial cystitis and benign prostatic hyperplasia. Recently, mullein root has become popularized for back pain. Herbalist Jim McDonald says, prepared either as an infusion or taken in small doses as a tincture, mullein root has been a lifesaver for me when working a bit too gung-ho, has me wake up the next morning with my back kinked and not quite able to straighten up. I usually take about 7 drops of tincture, stretch out a bit, and the kink disappears and I feel perfectly aligned. Mullein's biggest claim to fame is as an earache remedy. This historic use is backed up by the experiences of countless present-day parents and children. Mullein flower-infused oil acts as an anodyne to take away the pain of the earache while also exerting lymphatic action on the area around the ear to help restore the infection. Mullein flower-infused oil is commonly found in health food stores or apothecaries. Herbalist Michael Moore writes that mullein flower tea has a negative effect on the herpes simplex virus, HSV1, and seems especially helpful for adults and children who have frequent outbreaks around the mouth that are triggered by sun, food allergies, or estrogen surges before ovulation. Preliminary in vitro research shows some antiviral qualities against HSV1 as well as influenza. Mullein is a hyperaccumulator of heavy metals. This means it can uptake heavy metals from the earth and then store it. This ability has led to some interesting research on using mullein for soil remediation. Researchers in Serbia tested 5 different plants for cleaning up a heavily contaminated site. Their research concluded that because mullein efficiently transported metal pollutants into the above-ground parts, and because it fits well the desired characteristics for its use as a biomass, it is our plant of choice for further bioremediation use at the polluted industrial site. So that's pretty amazing. Go mullein. So how do I identify? Well, mullein often grows in poor soils and neglected places. It will pop up early before successive vegetation moves in. In its first year, the plant forms a basal rosette of grayish-green felt-like leaves. Covered in fuzzy hairs, these leaves are oblong or lanceolate, 4 to 12 inches long and 1 to 5 inches wide. The root is a taproot with fibrous secondary roots. In the second year, the plant produces a tall, wand-like stalk up to 10 feet tall. This stalk has smaller, alternately arranged leaves that decrease in size towards the top. Sometimes a plant will develop 1 or 2 side stems. Towards the top of the stalk, 5-petaled yellow flowers are arranged on a terminal spike. Only a few flowers bloom at a time, and each is open for 1 day, closing by mid-afternoon. Mullein flowers are visited by various insects, including bees, flies, and butterflies. If a flower has not been cross-pollinated by the end of the day, it will self-pollinate. Carder bees gather the hairs from mullein leaves to line their nests, which I think is a pretty interesting relationship there. Birds such as downy woodpeckers and goldfinches visit mullein to feast on the seeds as well as the insect larvae. So how to harvest? You want to harvest the basal leaves using a scissors or knife, preferably in the autumn of the plant's first year or spring of the second year. Because of the dense woolly hairs on mullein leaves, those can be a bit irritating, so you might want to wear gloves if you're going to process a lot of leaves. You can dig the taproot in the autumn of the first year to early spring of the second year before the stalk forms. You can handpick the flowers individually as they bloom early in the day before the flowers close. Mullein reproduces by seeds, which can survive for decades in the soil. This is definitely a survivor. So you want to make sure not to harvest all the flowers, which I think would be pretty difficult, but you want the plant to form seeds so they can drop those nearby and keep on surviving. There are some lookalikes that you want to be aware of with mullein. There's foxglove, digitalis purpurea, which is poisonous. Obviously, the flowers don't look anything alike, but the leaves can look very similar. And then there's lamb's ear, which is Stachys byzantina. And as mentioned, mullein is a hyperaccumulator of heavy metals, so you want to be certain that the mullein you're harvesting and using comes from healthy soils that aren't contaminated with metals. Mullein leaves can be dried for use in teas and steams. And because of those irritating tiny hairs on mullein leaves that I keep mentioning, you want to strain teas through a coffee filter so you can avoid ingesting them. Fresh leaves can be used to make a poultice, and whole leaves can be frozen to preserve them for a future poultice. Fresh or dried leaves can be used to make an alcohol extract. Flowers can be dried for use in teas. Fresh flowers or freshly dried flowers can be infused into oil or made into an alcohol extract. Mullein roots can be used fresh or dried as an alcohol extract. They can also be chopped and dried for use or in decoctions, or you can powder them for use in capsules. In terms of special considerations, the Botanical Safety Handbook gives mullein its highest safety rating, but I always like to tell clients especially that mullein oil should not be used in ear canals if the eardrum has been perforated. There's some dosage. You'll get all the slides later, so don't worry about trying to write these down too quickly if you're wanting to save that information. But basically with the leaves, you can take pretty high amounts of that, especially as strong teas. And the flowers, those dosage recommendations come from Michael Morris. He has a lot of experience using those flowers. It's not too many per cup, which is nice because they do take some time to harvest. And there's the dosage recommendation for the roots as well. And those can also be taken as a decoction or powder or made into a tincture. All right, our last lovely weed is violet. Violets are another harbinger of spring. Their smiling, colorful blooms gladden our hearts and brighten our faces as they pop up in lawns, they line stream banks, and fill feral meadows. These small and delicate plants offer us so much: food, medicine, as well as a balm to our hearts. For at least 1,000 years, herbalists have recommended violets for their cooling and moistening qualities, including dry coughs, hot headaches, hot fevers, and hot skin conditions. Many species of violets grow in temperate climates. The sweet violet, Viola odorata, is native to Europe and Asia, but has spread to North America and parts of Australia. To best understand its virtues, find a patch of violets and then get down on their level. You can kneel, but lying down and curling up close is best. You'll notice that the air is cooler here and you can feel how the dampness of the earth seeps into you. Hello, violet. As you touch those soft, delicate flowers and cup those heart-shaped leaves, you'll probably notice something else: happiness, relaxation, contentment. By spending intimate time with violet, you've absorbed everything you need to know to understand how this medicine works. Violet's cooling and moistening, it brings calming and soothing relief, especially to dry and tense tissues. Violets can help support lymph. Your lymphatic system is like a great waterway running throughout your body. And just as rivers and streams can run smoothly or become stagnant and swollen, so it is with your lymphatic vessels. Violet loves to grow near clear running water, and it can be used to keep your internal rivers running smoothly as well. Violet is revered for being able to break down hardened cysts, especially chronic ones. It's commonly used as a topical aid for fibrocystic breasts and other cysts below the skin surface. Violet is one of our best remedies for hot and dry skin. While it undoubtedly works in many ways, its cooling and moistening qualities combine with its ability to modulate inflammation to relieve hot, dry, and inflamed skin. I've used it as a strong tea to aid people who have hot skin conditions such as eczema. Violet's ability to soften and soothe those hot and inflamed tissues also can apply to your moods. Herbalist Jim McDonald recommends Violet for people who react to stress by screaming until they are red in the face, or for those who are overly rigid. Violet softens, he explains. It inspires flexibility. Hildegard von Bingen, the German Benedictine abbess who was born in 1098, used violets extensively and recommended them in wine for anyone oppressed by melancholy and a discontented mind, which then harms his lungs. I just love seeing this photo. It's from last year's spring violet harvest, and that was just such a beautiful day harvesting those violet flowers. So it truly is such wonderful medicine in so many ways. If you nibble on a fresh violet leaf, you'll find why it's a perfect remedy for dryness. Those sweet demulcent leaves are soothing and moistening. Irritated spasmodic coughs are often caused by dryness, and a violet tea restores moisture and relieves irritation. One double-blind randomized clinical trial with children aged 2 to 12 years found that violet syrup could help the coughs of children with intermittent asthma. Using violet for sleep is not really common practice that I know of in Western herbalism, but there was an interesting study in this traditional Iranian remedy. Researchers gave 50 patients with chronic insomnia 2 drops of a Viola odorata oil in each nostril nightly before sleeping. Then after a month, patients showed improvements in sleep. How to identify? Well, violets typically prefer cool, moist places, and they grow close to the ground with alternate or basal leaves. Leaves may be shaped like a heart or kidney with crenate margins. The slightly irregular flowers grow upright. Leafless stalks are slightly drooping and have 5 petals that are purple, blue, white, or yellow. Except for Viola odorata, most violet flowers don't have a strong fragrance. In some species, the showy flower is sterile, and the plant produces a tiny inconspicuous flower near the base. The self-pollinated flower is where the seeds are formed. For violet species that rely on pollinators for fertilization, the bright flowers attract insects like carpenter bees, mining bees, sweat bees, hoverflies, and skippers, and even small butterflies. Violets can also serve as host plants for butterflies and moths. Similar to the way that monarch butterflies depend on milkweed plants, several species of fritillary butterflies will lay their eggs only where there are violets for their larvae to eat. The seeds of some violets are coated with a sugary gel that attracts ants, and then these ants carry the seeds, aiding in their dispersal. There is a lot of poor quality dried violet on the market, so harvesting and growing your own can give you the best quality. And while the leaves and flowers may be gathered at any time during the growing season, tender young leaves are best and are found early in the season. And those are best especially for eating, but I've used older leaves throughout the season as needed as medicine. If you plan to dry the flowers, you want to pick them on a dry day without dew or rain. Wild violets should be picked judiciously, if not at all. It's better to find those kind of weedy, non-native violets, which typically grow in profusion. You can use scissors or your fingers to pick individual leaves and flowers, just a few from each plant, and take care not to disturb the roots. Violets, especially before flowering, have many lookalikes, including edible plants, as well as poisonous ones like monkshood and lesser celandine. So you want to be certain that you can identify the plant before harvesting. Violet flowers can be used in teas, infused vinegars, syrups, and jellies. Fresh or candied flowers make lovely garnishes for salads and desserts. The leaves can be eaten fresh in salads, steamed, or sautéed. And different violet species have varying degrees of saponins in the leaves. And this soapy constituent has medicinal benefits, but it can cause nausea if consumed in large amounts. So taste your leaves first to make sure that they are palatable and seem well worth eating. Here's some recommendations for dosage. The leaves and flowers can be used therapeutically in large food-like amounts. I do like strong teas of the leaves and flowers, and the tincture is also a great way to use violets as medicine. All right, I do have some final thoughts to round all this up, but now I want to give people opportunity to ask any questions that you might have, and Paula's going to help with that, orchestrating that.
We have a few.
All right.
No, well done so far. It's beautiful, beautiful presentation and just so well organized. So a couple questions here. With dandelion, does the chicory root equally compare to the standard dandy?
You know, I don't know from like a scientific perspective. I mean, they definitely have different constituents. It'd be interesting, you know, to see kind of like a study using dandelion root versus a study using chicory root. This might be my own this is my own preference, I guess, but I tend to use dandelion root more specifically as herbal medicine. And so, you know, like if I'm working with someone who could use liver support, I'm definitely thinking like, oh, I'm going to recommend dandelion root. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't typically tend to use chicory root a lot as its own standalone medicine. I do love it as a tea though, and I often combine it with dandelion root, especially roasting both of those roots. Chicory is very famous as like a so-called coffee substitute. But both of those roots, you roast them up and then you decoct them or simmer them, and it does make a very lovely roasted root beverage, and I do tend to recommend them together.
Sounds lovely. Okay, so with a bitters blend, if you wilted them fresh in alcohol, do you wilt them fresh in alcohol or does it need water for the release of medicine, or what parts are best? Curious particularly for, oh no, that's the end of the question.
Okay, do you, so I guess, you know, you can make bitters blend from so many different things. I'm pretty obsessed with bitters myself. You know, you could make them with all dried ingredients if you wanted. So I guess maybe that's how to answer that question. Like you don't need to wilt something, but you could, or you know, just use completely dried. I'm just not sure really what that question was asking, I guess, Paula.
So, what's the best way to release the medicine? Wilting it fresh in alcohol, or decocting it in some way, or doing it in oil, or some kind of an alcohol? I guess that's I understand it.
Well, I do like alcohol bitters. It's, you know, a tradition.
She's saying water versus alcohol.
I see. I see. So I do like alcohol for bitters. It's convenient. It's a tradition that comes out of Europe, making all these bitters blends with alcohol, and it works great because you're really getting that bitter flavor. But that could be really limiting for some people, and I'm always conscious of that with clients. You know, asking, you know, if if they're okay with having small amounts of alcohol, and if people aren't, then water is absolutely fine. Not for bitters, not only is water fine, like a bitter tea, but also things like I mentioned the dandelion pesto, which is, you know, pretty bitter. So even just as food is also basically, when it comes to bitters and promoting digestion, improving digestion, what we're looking for is that bitter taste. And so that can work via, you know, a tincture, via tea, or via food.
Thank you. I'm going to stay with dandelion here for a minute if I can find it. Oh, here's another one. For someone with a liver disease, which form of dandelion root is best? Tincture, tea, or to eat it?
Yeah. So I definitely, you know, would want to look at, you know, what kind of liver disease and what state of health they're in, look for contraindications. But if once safety is determined in that particular situation, I tend to prefer tea rather than alcohol for people who already have liver disease. I know, you know, when taking a tincture, it is a very limited amount of alcohol, but it just, to me, makes more sense to have, you know, something as a tea, or, you know, as mentioned, as food. Food with clients can be somewhat tricky just because it takes more preparation time. So that can also be a consideration, what's going to be easiest and consistent.
Right. Well done. Thank you. So, question if you use sweet leaf or vanilla leaf in any of your tea blends, and if you do, what's the medicinal or nutritional wisdom that you can offer about that?
Oh, well, I remember spending time with that plant many years ago when I first learned herbal medicine. I was on the west coast of Washington State, and it is such a lovely plant, but it's been well over 10 years since I worked with that plant. So I don't know a lot about it.
Okay, thank you. So let's go to mullein here. They often find that this is laden with many insects. So any advice you have for wild harvesting? Any tips?
Yeah. So I'm guessing the person's asking because I don't want the insects in their medicine. Fair enough. So what I do, and this is actually common with so many plants.
Or getting attacked by them, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. Yeah, so many wild medicines are going to have insects on them, like elderflowers, yarrow flowers, yellow dock seeds. Like those are some of the ones that really come to my mind as having lots of insects. So what I like to do is harvest with awareness. You want to see like what you're disturbing. For example, with mullein, one time I was harvesting mullein and I lifted up a leaf near the base, and that's when I found a little family of mice. The mice had just been born. They were still bald. They were so cute. So, I didn't grab that leaf away. I just gently put it back and let them have their way. So you always want to harvest with awareness to see what you might be disturbing. But disturbing insects is going to happen. And so I like to pay attention and just kind of gently shake them off where they're at so they can find another place to find home. So that's kind of like on site, but sometimes there's just so many insects on these plants that you don't get everything off on site. And so for things that I know that are pretty especially buggy, like again, the elderflowers really come to mind. And then I let them outside before I bring them in my house. And so sometimes, you can put them on like a light colored towel. Sometimes you can just shake them a little bit, see what comes off of them. When insects do come off of them, you can see what's in there and learn about insects near you. So that's another learning opportunity the plants give us. So yeah, it's like both on site and then both before I come home. Like I might just let them sit out for a while and let things disperse on their own.
So another one on mullein, you had spoken about the itchiness of it, but this question's around wild harvesting tips for getting around that itchiness.
Well, some people tend to be more sensitive than others. If I'm just harvesting a bit of mullein, it's not really a concern for me. I don't use gloves. But I have noticed that when I've had made larger mullein harvests, that after a while, those hairs can be a bit irritating on my hands. It's very mild for me, so it's not something I'm really concerned about. But people have varying degrees of sensitivity. So if it seems like someone's going to be really sensitive to that, then definitely harvesting with gloves is a good way to go.
Okay. Because some of these plants can clean our soils and store heavy metals, would this have a potential negative effect on our health?
Potentially, and that's why it's a good idea to know, the history of the soils that you're harvesting in. So yeah, that is a potential issue. And I live in a rural area where unfortunately the sides of the roads can be sprayed. Generally, we don't harvest right off the sides of the roads, but even trails can be sprayed. And specifically against things like mullein or burdock root and things I want to be harvesting. So I'm always paying attention to that, looking around, paying attention, looking for clues that
looking for signs. There's dead things around growing things when they should be fresh and vibrant. So.
Yep.
I was just walking through a beautiful old cemetery, and it's like, Why? I thought that they had just cleared the path. Certain areas indicated where to walk and where not to. It took me about 10 minutes, and it's like, oh no, this is Roundup.
Ugh. Yeah, and like once you recognize that smell, because it's kind of an interesting smell. Like it's not incredibly offensive, but it definitely has like a smell to it. And like I've definitely learned to become like very attuned to that smell and to recognize, I'm not going to harvest plants when that smell is available. And that's one thing I really like about, or I really encourage people is to have, regular harvesting spots that you can visit regularly because then you get to have a relationship with the land and then you get to see, regularly because if, with things like Roundup, they could spray in springtime and like by the fall, signs of that might not be as prevalent.
Certainly.
So it's a good idea to just be able to recognize or to visit things regularly so that you can see what's going on with the plants.
Thank you. On to violet. Is white violet the same as purple? And so can it be used in the same way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. And I have kind of like a broad answer to that. One, broadly speaking, you always want to know that species are used similarly. In this case, white violets are definitely not toxic or anything. But then when you're wondering, like, can I use this plant that's very similar to that plant? Once safety is established, I recommend tasting it. As I mentioned in the presentation, violets have a moistening sense. Like when you eat them, they have, like you can feel the moisture in them. They have that slight sweetness. And so, tasting them, like, is this sweet medicine? Is this cooling medicine? How is this? And that's really the best way to know if plants can be used similarly because the taste is really going to tell us so much. If there's a plant that's similar in use or that's similar in appearance, and again, I always want to caution safety is confirmed, but they taste dramatically different, then you're going to know that these are not the same. They might have their varying medicinal attributes, but if something smells differently, tastes differently, it's just going to be a very different plant medicine. So I encourage you to do that with white violets. There's so many different species out there that, like, I know that white violets that grow near me, I can use those similarly because they taste, they have that moisture to them when you taste them, and they have a similar taste to the purple variety.
Right.
So I know that for mine. I don't know that necessarily for the person asking the question, but I do recommend tasting.
Tasting and getting down and close and up personal. Like nothing better. We got some great herbalists on the call with us, and this one's asking about the violet flower and using it for dream time. This is how she learned about the plant. So is there a history or story around the violet flower and sleep dreaming, specifically dreaming?
I don't really, nothing comes to mind. When I found that study, the Iranian study about using the violet oil in the nostrils before sleep,
Right.
I thought that was so fascinating, and I share it in the hopes that more people will do that so we can start to, explore that even more. But
I'm going to.
yeah. Yeah, nothing is coming to mind in the moment about violet and sleep.
All right. So, Rebecca, if you have any experience with this yourself, please, or any history on it, please chime in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's a question, can you give us the link to the Iranian study? Was that on the slide?
I believe that was. I did go through and try and make sure every study I mentioned was on the slide, and in just a couple minutes I'll give you that link so you guys can download the slides.
All right, just general question with when using alcohol, perhaps for people that have a sensitivity to alcohol or trying not to have any alcohol, can it be cooked off?
Actually, it can't. You can get rid of some alcohol by, cooking it or adding heat to it, but you can't get rid of all of it. And when you do that, you're also kind of denaturing that solution. So for example, if you're like boiling something that has a lot of aromatic compounds to it, then you're going to be, releasing those aromatic compounds. So that's actually kind of a herban myth that you can get rid of the alcohol. You can get rid of some of the alcohol, but you can't get rid of all of it.
Okay.
But I do want to say, you know, as a clinician, I use very few tinctures. So many of my recommendations were teas and foods and other methods. So I know tinctures can be like really sexy and kind of the hot and happening thing. And they also, you know, obviously they have benefits. They're convenient and easy to take, but I never felt limited by not using tinctures. I really think we can get higher dosages and even more connection to the plants with teas. So.
There's so many great combinations we can do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, back to plantain and those psyllium seeds. Question about how to use psyllium then. Once you've got the seeds, whether you're buying them or harvesting, how and when do you use them?
Well, psyllium seeds are often used for bowel regularity, and kind of interesting, they can be used both for constipation and for loose stools. And typically, like kind of the biggest warning with them is that how you take them is you mix them into water, or sometimes you can buy them as capsules, but no matter what, you always want to take it with lots of water. That's a kind of a key thing. And there, you'll see, like if you buy it on the package, it'll like have warnings to take so much of it with water. And generally, like with most herbal medicines, even you start with a small amount and then slowly increase that amount until kind of the desired effects are achieved.
I'd say like a half a teaspoon to start with it.
Yeah,
And
to start.
you know, if you
Can go up
want
to
evidence,
a couple tablespoons if necessary.
right. And
But I
if
would never
anybody wants
start with a
evidence,
couple tablespoons. Don't ever do
no,
that.
no, 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 no. And if anybody wants evidence of why you need to drink lots of water, take a teaspoon and put it in a small glass of water and let it sit there for about an hour. Only don't put it in a glass, put it in like a paper cup because it'll turn solid and hard and you can't break that up. So we really don't want that in our digestive tract. And so taking it, you know, make sure that you're hydrating well throughout the day. Take it with a large glass of water and follow it with a couple others if you're doing it before bed. Back to nettles. For the plants that look like nettles, are any of them edible or are they all dangerous?
There are many that you wouldn't want to confuse with nettle. So, and you wouldn't want to use it the same way as nettle. So you really want to know exactly what you're looking at. Where we live, like some of the plants that I gave in tonight's presentation are plants that grow more East Coast, and I don't know them as much as the ones here. So I definitely would want to, you definitely want to know those plants well and know what you're harvesting and know how to approach those individual plants.
Okay. Dandelion, there's a question that there seems to be many varieties. Are they all good?
I don't know about there being many varieties. We do have a native dandelion that can grow in the alpines. We typically don't use that, and there's not really any reason to either. Might as well let that one go and have our native, or our weedy dandelion. Sometimes in stores, there's dandelion that's sold, and sometimes it's labeled like Italian dandelion, and it's actually a form of chickweed or chicory that's cultivated by many farmers because it has those big leaves that aren't super bitter. So, but as far as I know, there's just the one. So.
Okay. I think, there's some confusion when I go on herb walks. People say it was like there's the really small ones, like the picture that you saw, but they're more fuzzy leafed, really small versus ones that grow 14 inches versus the 4 inches long ones. So anyway, they're all good.
Well, dandelion leaves are smooth, so if they have fuzzy leaves, that's probably hawkweed or another dandelion lookalike. One thing that's interesting about dandelion, maybe this is where the question comes from, because what you said, Paula, makes me think of it. Dandelion will grow in accordance with its habitat, and so if it's grown, like say in a lawn that gets frequently mowed, it'll stay short and close to the ground, and it'll put out its like smaller leaves and flower heads that are that kind of mimic the growth of the lawn around it, the grass around it. But if you find it growing in a meadow with long, other long grasses that aren't mowed, it'll grow long, tall and have really long leaves that, again, kind of echo the plants around it. So those are the exact same plants, but it'll change its growing, its growth habits depending on where it is and what the plants are doing around it.
Okay, thank you. I think last question for here is, because tincturing does not extract the vitamins and minerals, does it kill them, or could you further extract them? How do you feel about using the plant matter after tincturing?
So yeah, it doesn't kill them. It just doesn't extract them well. Let's say you're making a tincture and you're using a solution. Your menstruum is 50% alcohol and 50% water. So in that case, you maybe you are pulling out some vitamins and minerals. But then when you think about the dosage that you're taking the tincture in, then we're thinking very minimal amounts are actually making it through your final product. So another thing to consider is like how do I say that? Like, let's say you have a quart jar, all right, and you fill that quart jar with the amount of herbs that you're going to use for a particular tincture ratio that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I talked about, say, nettles and taking that as a tea, when you make a tea from nettles, like a very strong infusion, you're using a whole ounce of nettles, which fills the, can fill the jar up like halfway in itself. And then you're making a tea out of that much herbal material. And the water extracts those vitamins and minerals really well. So you're ending up with this final product that has lots of vitamins and minerals in it. So again, thinking about like what's in that quart of tincture is that you're putting, maybe the jar is filled 3/4 of the way with the nettle, and very, much less vitamins and nutrients are getting through, if any of all, through what the water content might be, but then you're just drinking a lot less of that too. So that's why there's just minimal amounts. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine because I do see articles on the internet that's like how to make your multivitamin tincture. Like, no, I don't think so. It's just not going to work. But in terms of processing the plant material afterwards, you can certainly do that. That's not something I've done, and I don't really know, how much you're getting after the fact. And again, like thinking about the quantities that are going on, you're just going to get way more if you're drinking a nettle tea and extracting that much nettle and drinking it in one go. But again, I don't know a lot about processing the plants after the tincture.
Okay. Thank you. Then I'm going to turn this back to you.
Okay. All right. I just have a few closing thoughts about kind of putting this into practice. So I just want to share ways that you can bring weeds as well as nature connection to your life, to your client's life. And of course, there's a wide range of possibilities depending on who you are as a practitioner as well as who your client is. So the following are just my suggestions, and if they don't match entirely to your experience, then of course you can shift them to be more relevant. So as always, we want to meet our clients where they are. And one way you can do this is to include nature connection as part of your intake process. You can ask them things like, are they happy with the amount of time spent in nature? How do they already like to spend time outdoors? What are ways they would like to spend more time outdoors, etc. And so a discussion around these topics could evolve about ways to further prioritize time spent outdoors. Another way to incorporate these ideals is to share stories of the herbal medicines that you give. So if you harvest and make the medicines yourself, then you can share that experience. Even just a sentence or two can help bring the medicine to life. And if you aren't directly involved in the making of the herbal medicines that you recommend, you can simply share about a particular plant. Again, just a sentence or two. You don't have to write books on it. But for example, you could say, this formula contains dandelion root, which is one of my favorite plants for supporting the liver. I love how these roots are so tenacious and can anchor into the soil, whether it's in the garden or a crack in the sidewalk. You could talk about its long tap roots that bring up nutrients from deep in the soil, which then provide nourishment for us.
Lovely.
But by starting that conversation of nature connection and by sharing the stories of where their medicines come from, you can really begin to show them how being involved in the world around them is just as important as the herbal medicines they take. There's really that qualitative difference between, throwing back a handful of pills and calling that healthy and then also, between living a life of nature awareness.
Beautiful. Is, stories, and
Mm.
you can personalize it too. I mean, just thinking about violets and their conferring happiness and relaxation and, calming energy. And it brings to mind when I was a young girl in grade school, before school, I'd go out and pick my mom a handful of violets. And it made us
Mm.
both very happy and relaxed and loving each other. So I would lead with that
Absolutely.
and then come in and talk about its other qualities and things like that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah, encouraging. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say spending time with Violet really can change your mindset. And so, that works for us, that works for everyone. So definitely. And so some people like stories and are really, motivated by the storytelling experience. Other people can be more motivated by just solid information. So
Mhm.
if your client is someone who likes information or they like proof of something, then you can share studies like this one, which show the benefits of spending time outside. In this study, researchers set out to test the stress hormones of urban dwellers before and after they spent time in nature. Volunteers were instructed to spend time outside, wherever they felt they could interact with nature. They were instructed to avoid aerobic exercise and phone distractions and reading. So just, sitting out in nature. And researchers found that after 20 minutes, stress hormones were significantly reduced, and the most benefit was seen between 20 and 30 minutes of outdoor time.
Mhm.
Those are the links there to get the full original study and then an easy to read article.
Thank you for these.
Yeah. Part of your health plan for your clients can include ways that they can be further involved in the world around them. And again, this can be led by their own interest. And you can help them find nature learning experiences, guided plant walks. Maybe you already do that and they can come to one of your walks. Bird watching, local interpretive centers can be a great source of information,
Mhm.
botanical gardens, things like forest bathing, etc. And when I was in clinical practice, I had clients who were already seasoned herbalists, as well as people who could barely recognize a dandelion. So obviously, for the latter group, it would really be a stretch to be like, immediately jump to encouraging them to forage. So there's that. But some people may already be ready for that step, and encouragement from you might be all that's necessary to get them making some of their own wild foods and medicines.
Mhm.
All right, that's it. Thank you so much. And thank you especially to Paula and everyone at Hawthorn University for having me here. It's always a pleasure. And as mentioned, you can get those slides and recipes at that URL there. And Paula and I can chat a bit while you guys get that URL written down.
Yes, the slides will be available, with the recipes here from Rosalee, and Hawthorn will also, we've recorded this and it'll be posted on our website in a few days, certainly by Friday, and you'll have the PDF of the slides as well as the recording to go with it.
Perfect. Yeah, and
Mm,
there's lots of big photos on the slides, but I did, a lot of those studies are on there too. So and then the dosage information as well can be helpful. I know it's, I try to get through information at a good pace, so it can be hard to write it all down, but I do that knowing that you can get the slides later on.
it's fantastic to have it like that, and just for stress reduction, just go through the slides and look at the beautiful pictures. It's very, very
I
calming.
have a good time looking at the pictures. As I mentioned, like sometimes I, get distracted just because it reminds me of not all of the pictures are mine, but most of them are. And so they are reminders to me of time spent outside and
That's
time,
right.
spending time with the woodpeckers or what have you. So.
That's right. Well, I have some closing thoughts, but a couple of things that I want to say from attendees. There's several people that have just said, I just bought the pre-order book on Amazon. Thank you very
Oh,
much.
thank you so much.
Inspiring talk, right? And someone really wants you to know how lovely your spirit is.
Oh, thank you. Oh, very
Right,
sweet.
right? Yeah, yeah. Um, everybody there's so many new people on the call. I appreciate you joining us and want to spend some time talking more about Hawthorn. But right now, I just want to say there's a survey to fill out before the webinar ends, right after the webinar ends. And it will certainly help to have your feedback and any comments that you have about this presentation. And I sure appreciate you taking the time. Getting feedback about what you like or didn't in a presentation really helps us improve. We're always looking for that.
Mm-hmm.
Our next webinar will be on March 17th when we host Jonathan Posey. He's from the Council for Health Educators, and he's going to be presenting on the legal updates for functional and holistic nutrition. Important one to find out what your state rights and limitations are for those in practice. And our next All About Alumni graduate interview is actually tomorrow on March 3rd at 12 noon. And we have our Master of Science Holistic Nutrition graduate, Ben Warren. He's going to be presenting about his post-grad activities, accomplishments, and challenges. Really think this is one to tune in for sure. And we've had so many previous terrific grad presentations, so I encourage you to check them out. They're all listed in our archives, as well as the webinars that we're doing, like this one with Rosalee. We have years of these on there. It's a treasure trove. And if you want to know what our graduates are doing and what it's like to be a student in school, All About Alumni presentations, they're short 30, 45-minute interview style conversations that I have. The ways that our students are using their education and the work they're doing in the world is amazing to me. It's so broad, it's so varied. So please take a look, because I certainly hope that we've inspired you to learn more about health and nutrition and avail yourself of all the free offerings that Hawthorn has for you. And so that concludes today's presentation. I just really want to thank you again, Rosalee. It's been brilliant and just so wonderful to have you here again.
Well, thank you, Paula. It's always a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You
Share
bet.
my love of weeds with everybody.
I want to thank everybody for sharing this educational experience together. And I want to wish you all the best of health, and I certainly look forward to learning more together during our Hawthorn's webinars and our All About Alumni series. But until then, I'm going to continue tending to my weeds and my health, as well as happiness and compassion and kindness, because what we practice grows stronger. So I hope you'll join me in this too. That's it, everybody. Take good care.